Getting into pseudo classes, first of all, I just want to let you know that there are more than just the love-hate, which is the link, visited, hover, active pseudos. And to start tapping into a few more, first we're going to cover the first child pseudo. The first child pseudo will match the first child of another element. So if we wanted the first div element to have a red border, we'd write this. So inside of our style, we have div, so it's going to select all the divs, first child, border 1 pixel solid red. So that means the first div is going to have a 1 pixel solid red border, and that displays down here. Now to explain why it does that, it's because this is the first div child inside the body element. Now what if you want to go deeper? You want to style the first child elements inside other elements. Let's give that a look. We could use div greater than underline first child. And again, we're just going to give it a 1 pixel solid red border, and that allows us to see exactly what we're looking for. So we have our div, and then we're going to be looking for the first underline. So we have a first one here, and we have our second one here. So our first one will be bordered with a red border. The second one will not, because that's not the first child, that is the second child. To make this simple, we're going to go over the document object model, the DOM, real quickly. So we have the body, which would be, for example, our grandparent, and then div would be our parent, and then our parent has 2 children. Both of them are underlines. So let's say twins, but with twins, one twin is always born before the other. So this twin was born first, and this twin was born second. Thus, this would be the first child, and it would be bordered red. Now this is all great and dandy if you wanted to select and style the first child of an element, but what if you wanted to style all the elements in a first child? So instead of just selecting one underline, you want to select all the underlines. Similar to how we nested selectors in an earlier class, we do the same thing here, and the CSS would look like this. So we have our div, first child, space, underline. Remember when we nested, it looked just like this, div space underline, and that would style all the underlines that are inside the div. Well, now what we're doing is we're applying the first child pseudo to the div element, and then selecting all the underlines in it. So this is, again, very similar to nesting. However, now it's just going to select the first child div and all the underlines inside of that. Now looking at the code, we have our div, which would be our first child. Well, actually it would be our only child because there's only one div. And it's going to select all the underlines in here. And the example below shows that that's true. So in this method, we selected the first child of div, then told it to border all the underlying elements, just like how we nested the CSS. We start with the parent, and the last selector to be written is the most child element that you want to style. So we have our parent element, first child pseudo, and then we have a child element, or, a grandchild, and so on and so on. And it's always going to select the last one, creating a more advanced filter that's going to filter through more and more code to match whatever it can. Now, instead of selecting just the first child, we can select the first letter. First letter works in a very similar manner, but instead of selecting the first child element, it's going to select the first letter in an element. Let's see how we can make the first letter of every paragraph much larger. What we did was we have our paragraph selector, first letter instead of first child, and we just change the font size. And inside of our body, we just have a paragraph element. No big deal. This is my paragraph, and it will display, this is my paragraph. Now the T is a 32 pixel font. That's because it is the first letter in the paragraph. With first letter, only some styles can be applied, and here's a list of them. I'd also like to let you know that before we go through this list that it can depend on the browser, depending on what the browser will support and what it doesn't support. Generally, it does support all of these, but again, that answer can fluctuate depending on the browser, depending on the version as well. So the font style can be applied, color, all the background properties, padding and margin, all the border properties, text decoration and text transform, line height, float, and clear. Now, if we wanted to go even farther and just style the first line, we can do that too. Using the first line pseudo, we can style the first line of anything. So for example here, we have our body selector, And the first line in our body is going to have a word spacing of 15 pixels. So here we have our body paragraph. That's not really that relevant. We can actually just completely remove that. This is my first line spaced out, the line break. The second line isn't. And how this would display would be a little more like this, very spaced out. And the second line would be normal. Now same thing, only the following properties can be applied to the first line pseudo. So we have all the font properties, color, background properties, word spacing and letter spacing, line height, as well as clear. And again, this can vary on the browser and the version that you're using. And to be completely honest, you might not even use these all that often, if at all. They are good to know though if you want to style some font or a specific line, if you're writing an article and you want the first letter to be styled, like how you see in books. It makes things a lot more fancy and allows some creativity for the user to read or to see.